Sometimes a life pivots in a single breath, and for Lewis Hensley, that moment arrived on a snow-buried mountain road with a rusted key digging into his palm and a heart full of years he couldn't get back. The lodge rose out of the storm like an abandoned memory. Dark timber, frozen porch, windows dimmed by dust and silence. When he pushed the door open, cold air rushed past him like a ghost leaving the room. Inside, the place felt untouched by time, as if waiting specifically for him. Under the staircase, he found the trunk, heavy, locked, and filled with Bernard's journals, letters, and years of stories he'd never told anyone. Reading by the crackling fire, Lewis discovered that the uncle he barely knew hadn't lived a solitary life at all. He had opened these walls to broken people, runaways of grief, wanderers of fear, men and women who needed a place to unravel and stitch themselves whole again. Every page carried a voice Lewis could almost hear, every photograph a life reborn through quiet kindness. Snow pinned him inside for days, but instead of feeling trapped, he felt tethered, to Bernard, to the past, to something that was pulling him forward. By dawn on the third morning, the truth settled in his bones. He hadn't inherited a building. He had inherited a purpose. Lewis explored the lodge like a man discovering the echoes of a forgotten world. Bernard's kitchen still smelled faintly of herbs dried decades ago. The workshop held tools worn down by the hands of people who found meaning here, and the shelves overflowed with journals documenting lives stitched back together one fragile moment at a time. There were stories of Constance, who fled years of fear, Fritz, who discovered the gift of woodworking, Albert, who relearned how to breathe after losing everything. Each journal entry revealed a pattern. People arrived broken, worked, rested, healed, and left carrying a piece of the lodge with them. And yet in every story, Bernard stood quietly in the background, guiding but never demanding, shaping but never claiming credit. One night Lewis found Constance's quilt, a tapestry of fabric squares cut from clothing left behind by every soul who passed through these doors. Some squares were sewn, some only pinned, waiting for the next stories. As he held the quilt up to the firelight, he saw his own life reflected in those empty spaces. His marriage had unraveled, his daughter had grown distant, and he'd stopped believing he could feel connected to anything again. But here, surrounded by the lives Bernard had touched, something inside him felt less fractured. The lodge wasn't asking him to replace Bernard. It was asking him to belong. The illusion of safety shattered the moment Lewis opened the county envelope. The red stamp, final notice, shook him harder than the blizzard outside. Bernard had fallen behind on property taxes for 3 years. Medical bills had drained everything he owned. The total was $48,000. The due date was 3 weeks away. Foreclosure would erase the lodge, erase its stories, erase every trace of the people who had come here to heal. Lewis sat at Bernard's old desk, head in his hands, grief rising like a tide. He had no savings, no backup plan, no one to blame. But then he remembered Bernard's words scribbled in a margin. The lodge survives because the people believe in it. Lewis grabbed his phone, hands shaking, and called Autumn. Their relationship had been brittle ever since the divorce, but she listened, really listened, as he explained the truth. She didn't scold him, she didn't criticize, she simply said, "Then we save it." Within hours, she launched a crowdfunding page, wrote the story, uploaded photos of the journals, and told him to start calling every person Bernard had ever helped. "They deserve the chance to give back," she said. So he dialed number after number through the night. Fritz answered first, his voice already thick with emotion before Lewis finished speaking. He pledged $5,000, Others followed, 200 here, 500 there, 1,000 from someone who'd rebuilt their life within these walls. By sunrise, they had 12,000. It wasn't enough, but for the first time since opening the letter, Lewis felt the faint glow of hope. Momentum became their lifeline. The crowdfunding page spread faster than Lewis could refresh it, donations rising in small, steady ripples. Strangers shared their own stories, memories of grief, depression, fear, and wrote that they wished a place like the lodge had existed when they were lost. Autumn pushed the story into every corner of social media, driven by a fire Lewis hadn't seen in her since she was a child. News outlets picked it up. Blogs wrote about it. Soon the quiet refuge Bernard built had become a symbol of second chances. But time was slipping. With 2 days left and still thousands short, Autumn suggested something that terrified Lewis: a live stream. He resisted. He was no storyteller, but the lodge deserved a voice. So he sat in Bernard's chair, framed by journals, photographs, and the quilt glowing behind him. As thousands tuned in, Lewis told Bernard's story with a trembling honesty that shook even him. He spoke of the people who had lived here, the healing that happened in silence, the legacy at stake. Donations poured in $50, 500, then 1,000. They finished the stream exhausted but hopeful, sitting at 46,000. Only 2,000 short. Lewis felt that familiar ache of almost, but fate wasn't finished. At midnight, a message came from Diane, a woman whose son had died decades ago. She sent 2,000 from her son's life insurance, writing, "Bernard helped me find joy again. Use this to save the place that saved me." Lewis wept as the total hit 48,000. The lodge was safe. 2 days later, cars lined the snowy drive for the gathering. People who hadn't seen one another in 30 years embraced like family lost and returned. Constance arrived, fragile but fierce. Fritz showed up carrying handmade furniture. Preston walked in proudly pointing out the plumbing system he'd installed decades earlier. Vera and Sterling held hands like survivors. Townspeople, friends of Bernard, hikers who had once stopped by during storms, all arrived carrying dishes, stories, memories. The lodge came alive with voices echoing through the halls, warming every space winter had tried to claim. Lewis set up displays, journals open to pivotal moments, Albert's botanical drawings hung on the walls, Constance's quilt draped over the couch with its empty squares. Board members from the Conservation Trust moved through the lodge, watching the reunion unfold. They saw healing living in real time. They heard laughter breaking through old wounds. They witnessed love that hadn't withered with age. And in their notes and exchanged glances, Lewis saw the answer forming. When Fritz pulled him into the workshop, he handed Lewis a small wooden box carved with swirling grain. Inside was $6,000, money pooled from people who had stayed here long ago. "For the future," Fritz said. "This is our place too." Moments later, Autumn approached with her phone, showing him the crowdfunding page exploding again. Diane's story had gone viral, and donations had surpassed 62,000. More than enough for the taxes, enough to repair the lodge, enough to begin again. For the first time, Lewis didn't feel like the man inheriting a burden. He felt like the man inheriting a family. The trust board met days later, walking slowly through the lodge as sunlight thawed the last of winter outside. They inspected the repairs Lewis had carefully made, examined the journals documenting decades of transformation, and listened as former residents shared how their lives had changed within these timber walls. At the end of the tour, their verdict was unanimous. The lodge would be protected forever under the Conservation Trust. Standing on the porch afterward, Lewis felt years of weight slide off his shoulders. The lodge no longer lived on borrowed time. It had a future, and for the first time in decades, he had one too. Over the coming weeks, he and Autumn rebuilt more than the creaking boards and aging plumbing. They rebuilt their relationship. She visited often, bringing ideas, energy, and a fierce determination to preserve the place that had unexpectedly become her anchor as well. Lewis fell into a rhythm he didn't know he needed. Mornings tending the garden Albert once planted, afternoons repairing furniture Fritz had built, evenings reading Bernard's journals by the fire. And then came the first new guest, a woman named Bryn, tired, shaky, carrying the weight of a career lost to burnout. Lewis gave her the same gift Bernard had offered so many: space, warmth, quiet, and the permission to simply exist. And in those moments, he understood why Bernard had never advertised the lodge. Healing wasn't a business, it was a calling. As spring unfolded across the mountains, the lodge transformed from a relic into a heartbeat. Birds returned to the trees Diane once taught others to identify. The lake thawed into a mirror for the rising sun, and the garden burst into patches of green that felt like hope made visible. Bryn found her footing, spending mornings walking the trail, afternoons helping Lewis with repairs, evenings talking softly about the life she felt slipping back into place. More inquiries arrived. A veteran fighting nightmares, a woman ending a 40-year marriage, a man grieving the loss of a child. Lewis scheduled each person carefully, giving them the space Bernard once gave so generously. He journaled every night, following Bernard's tradition, filling pages with stories of growth, pain, resilience, and the quiet moments that stitched people back together. One afternoon, Lewis finally added his own square to Constance's quilt, a piece of the work shirt he had worn during all the years H. He had drifted through a life that no longer fit him. The stitches were clumsy but honest, and when he held the quilt up to the window, he saw himself truly woven into its history. That evening, he and Autumn sat on the porch, watching the sunset pour gold over the mountains. She asked him if he was happy. He searched for the word but found something deeper: purpose, peace, belonging, and somewhere beneath all of that, yes, happiness. They sat in silence until the stars emerged. Inside, the lodge waited for its next story, its next beginning. Summer arrived quietly, softening the last scars of winter, and the lodge breathed with new life. The trust board returned for a final walkthrough, smiling at the repairs, the flourishing garden, and the stories Lewis shared of recent guests rediscovering themselves. They confirmed what everyone already felt: this place was no longer at risk. It was becoming what Bernard always intended, a refuge renewed with every life passing through its doors. As Lewis stood among the people gathered there, Fritz with his handmade furniture, Constance with her bright eyes, Vera and Sterling with hands intertwined, town residents who brought boxes of food and memories, and Autumn standing beside him with pride warming her face. He realized he had not only saved a legacy, he had stepped into it. When the gathering quieted, he looked at the quilt draped across the couch, its newest square stitched into place. The next one waited empty, ready for someone else who would come seeking peace. Lewis finally understood what Bernard had meant. The lodge was never about the building. It was about belief, about healing, about giving people a place to breathe when the world felt too heavy to carry alone. And as he closed the lodge door that evening, he felt completely, irrevocably home. If this story moved you even a little, tap the like button. It helps these stories reach more hearts. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe if you'd like more stories just like this one. Now tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it where you are right now?